what we'd like to start with is kind of an open-ended question and ask you to sort of assess your performance, the council's performance over these last 4 years, and also articulate what you think this election is about.
Council performance over the last 4 years in any regard, all regards,
yeah, what's
generally?
Your general report card on how you've performed this last 4 years and the council?
Well, it's hard to be unbiased about one's own performance, isn't it? I think actually the council, except for where we do differ pretty considerably, I think, on development matters, I think the council has done a good job with labor. I think we've done a good job with utilities. I think those advancements have been good. We've made some good advancements, I think, also since I've been on council with how the CAOs are evaluated. I was a strong proponent for not having the kind of reviews that we had previously, which was just, the CAO would talk to the council and the council would talk to the CAO. So I lobbied for and was finally successful, especially with Sid and Yahweh's support, to get not 180 reviews, but basically 180 reviews. So the staff members have input into the CAO's review. So we're not just talking to each other. And that's been very, very helpful. It's proven to be helpful. I think those are some advancements we definitely have made. We've done better with earlier packet release. The first colleagues memo that I was a part of was I basically wrote a colleagues memo to lobby for policies and procedures, or procedures and protocols actually, to require earlier packet release, to stop the last minute submittals by applicants, which had happened on several projects where an applicant would just come and present at the council what they wanted reviewed, and the council was actually voting on those. And another was to strongly recommend that council members not meet with members of the public that are advocates for or against, or with other interested parties such as developers, applicants, on projects that would be coming to the council prior to final ARB and Planning Commission recommendations, and the reasons for that are obvious. When it comes to development, I think the council hasn't done as good a job. I've been on the minority side of many of those votes. I think we're not really adhering very well to our comprehensive plan, and I'm not happy when a project comes forward and the comprehensive plan amendment happens in concurrence with a plan or a project that's approved. I think that's not a very good process. It's rather a piecemeal approach. And I think we're giving far too many exceptions on development projects, so the public doesn't have a good way to understand what is to be expected and what can be expected. And I think, frankly, if the council doesn't take a stronger position, the staff is in an awkward position too, of like, well, this is what we've been doing, should we keep doing this? So I think the council as a whole needs to take a stronger leadership position in that way.
And what is this election, what's the meaning of this election? Why do we have 12 people running and such a divided collection of candidates about some of these issues?
Not quite sure I got the question there.
Well, let me put it another way.
Please,
How will
thank you.
the results of this election send some sort of message about the views of the community?
Well, I think the views of the community were fairly strongly stated around the Maybell project, and I supported that project. I did think it was a good one, but it got to be about a bigger issue. It got to be about development, as I understood it, and talking with people who voted against the project and who were concerned about development but decided to vote for the project. So I think that was kind of a bellwether. And I think that this council election and the candidates in this council election are representative of that. There are people who are taking moderate growth positions, and I think and hope the public will be able to ferret out those who will more strongly represent and uphold the comprehensive plan and our zoning rules. And by the way, I want to be clear, and you know this about me, I'm not saying that we should never have an exception. There are instances where they're appropriate. but they're just way too frequent, and that's not good planning or zoning, either compliance, either one.
Can you give some examples of the exceptions you're talking about? The other than PC zone applications, of which there have been few during these last few years, the frustration that I hear from council members is that these projects are coming in within the existing zoning, and that you really don't have very much wiggle room in whether to approve them or not. So when you say we're granting way too many exceptions, what are you referring to?
I'm primarily referring to design enhancement exceptions, which are granted regularly. The project that was approved by the council majority, where the We Fix Max building is now, and I'm not good at remembering addresses specifically, but that project exceeded the 50-foot height limit through a design enhancement exception for living space, which is contrary to what a design enhancement exception is even for. So that's one example. I've talked before about how we have some very good two-story buildings. I'm not lobbying for two-story buildings, but I think we don't have to have exceptions to have good-looking buildings and attractive buildings and buildings that are code compliant. But when we send projects, when applicants take projects to the ARB, they're oftentimes using the zoning standards as the minimum and then rely on exceptions, it seems like, at the ARB to get a better looking project, as opposed to a good looking project that's compatible, which is one of the findings that's necessary by the ARB, should happen within the zoning requirements and not outside of. And the other thing I would say about design enhancement exceptions, and I've had this issue since I was back on the Planning Commission, is they're used now the way variances used to be used. Design enhancement exceptions were really intended for, and if you look at the code, intended for minor architectural features, but they're used for height exceptions now that are considerable, for setbacks and any number of things that are not minimal.
There's a whole nother zoning piece of this, which is that the required mandated bonus density provisions are essentially then adding on development capacity to our existing zoning.
Yes.
Those really are much more significant than the design exceptions that you're referring to. What steps do you believe, if any, the council should take prior to the adoption of a new comprehensive plan to address that particular problem?
Well, I think there have been some suggestions already at the council level to talk about looking at whether we need to reduce the floor area ratio within our zoning code to help compensate for that. And it's not to really how is an appropriate way to say it? It's not really to get around the state mandates, but it is to say we have local concerns and we want local control. And so when we're giving support for affordable housing units, we also want it to be in a reasonable way that isn't negatively impacting our community. And so I think there are some adjustments that can be made towards FAR. I think there's some adjustments that can be made towards how much of the FAR that is in place should be really office. Should we readjust that? Because general office creates an impact.
Is it your opinion that that needs to follow the adoption of a revision of the comprehensive plan?
I think there are some things that really won't wait for the adoption of a comprehensive plan. I'm one of the people that doesn't think the comprehensive plan needs a major overhaul. I don't think there's that much about the comprehensive plan that needs to be updated. I think by and large it's a good document. And so if we wait until after, the marketplace is roaring. It's roaring. And if we wait until after we've adopted a new comprehensive plan, it's going to be, well, it was scheduled for the end of 2015. And then if you look at the zoning that implements that, it's another probably 2-3 years. So we're looking a few years out, and in the meantime, the marketplace is roaring. So I think some things we just have to address in the nearer term. That's one of them.
And do you feel like a current council majority is prepared to do that?
By and large, I would say yes. I would say yes, we're going to differ on some of the ways that might happen, but I think this council is prepared to address the issues. Whether we'll agree on what the outcomes are, I don't know. That's probably more at question.
You were just talking a little bit about the issues that you feel like the council did well on, and those that were perhaps not done so well. I'm wondering if there's any specific vote that you took that you would, in hindsight, reverse, or that you think your thinking has evolved on since you cast a particular vote.
The one that I was really on the fence about at the time was 195 Page Mill. And I ultimately ended up voting for that project because it's a lot of rental housing. But I do think it's a large project and probably too large for the site. So if I had it to do over again, I might well vote against that project where I voted for it at the time. So other than that, I'm comfortable with my votes. You know, I do my homework ahead of time, and I listen to what staff and members of the public and colleagues have to say. So I'm pretty comfortable and confident in my votes, you know, all said and done. But that one's one where, you know, I'm still a little on the fence about that one.
Okay.
You didn't mention the Maybell vote. You would vote the same way again?
I would. I think it was a good project, and I understand that was not popular with a lot of people. It was also popular with a number of people. I guess the things that I used to weigh that were, I lived not so far from a not even senior affordable housing project, and I spent about a year prior to the Maybell project ever even coming before us monitoring that parking garage. I would monitor it regularly, almost weekly, and it's not that well occupied. You know, you could shoot a cannon off down there. And if you look at senior affordable housing, there, it seems to me, and based on reports, going to be driving even less. And I know there were comments in the public about, but I'm a senior and I drive, but that's a different set of people than senior affordable housing occupants. So that's one. Another is you know, having served 8 years on the Planning Commission, I'm familiar with affordable housing projects and then how they have to be put together. And also I was 2 years liaison to the Palo Alto Housing Corp, and putting together a project and getting the finance pieces together it's masterful if you can do it. And so, you know, both the timing and the identification of funding sources is quite tricky. It's delicate. And so I did not object to the Housing Corp using ultimately 12 market rate housing units to help support that project. I think with with land prices the way they are here, I think we're probably going to see more of that in order to help support construction of affordable housing. And I guess the other thing is, you know, I was on the SOFA 1 and 2 working groups, and so there were comments and concerns about the large houses on small lots. We did, as a council, we took, or council majority, whichever it was, took the third floor off of the houses on Maybell. We had moved the driveways around to the back off Maybell as well. And the reason I mentioned SOFA 1 is because there's a zoning there called DHS, detached houses on small lots. So I'm familiar with what some of the larger houses can look like on small lots. So, and those have turned out to be pretty compatible with the neighborhood. So I didn't have those concerns. I wish communications around the project and that development had been better. But as far as the project itself, I thought it was good. The affordable housing part of it, that was the higher density, was tucked up against the larger buildings that already exist. I could go on. There are a number of reasons why I thought it was a good project. Nothing's perfect, but I thought it was a quite good project for a number of reasons.
So we're currently in a moratorium on the PC zoning, and I'd like to ask, what do you think is the future if you could just be the one person in charge of what to do with the zoning ordinance? What would you do with PC zones?
Well, it's tricky. I'm not one of the people who wants to get rid of them. I think I've said that before, even with you. I think there are occasions where they're useful. I think they should be used rarely. If you look at the findings that have to be made, it talks about uniqueness of the site, and it just doesn't happen that often. So I think they should be used rarely. I don't think they should be used as a way to get around other zoning issues. For instance, 101 Lytton, there was an exception given there to the height, even though it's near residential. There was a question asked about using transferable development rights there, which does support other public good, and they couldn't use them because it was within 150 feet of residential. But the PC allowed that. So I think they should be used rarely. They shouldn't be used to get around, other code issues. And I think public benefits need to be codified in a way that they're assured and enforced and penalized if something happens that they're not in place. How do you define a public benefit? That's a tricky question. It's a really tricky question, but it shouldn't be de minimis.
Would you favor some sort of menu then of public benefits that would be acceptable?
I think a menu is a good idea because it gives examples. It's like I mentioned the design enhancement exceptions previously. It gives examples so you have an idea of what's intended. Because time passes, councils change, staff changes, so I think it's really good to give examples because then future council staffs, whatever, the public has something to base their decisions on. So I think a menu of items is good. It can't be absolutely exclusive to that list, I don't think, because times change, markets change, community needs change, but I think a menu of things to consider is actually very good.
Does a grocery store belong in that menu?
I think it does, and here's why, because we have no other way to ensure that a grocery store is going to be present.
Some would question whether that's a way to ensure that a grocery store is present.
Yes.
Would you voted for the JJNF PC?
I voted against it.
Oh, you
I was on Planning Commission.
Planning Commission.
I was on Planning Commission. I voted against it, and it was predictable that the market wasn't going to be there. But the other thing is, it's a basic planning tenet is that you don't ever base a zoning decision on a tenant. You base it on a use. And they were granted, in my opinion, an overly large exception to zoning because it became an emotional thing in the community because it was JJNF. So I don't think it's a good project, and I voted against it because of that and because the premise is really flawed because it was based on a tenant.
One of the difficulties that we're seeing downtown is the change of usage of maybe an office space. One company moves out, another company with way more employees moves in, and doesn't account for the parking problems that ensue. I'm wondering what you would do is there anything mechanical or structural that you would suggest for the city to do to account for this change of intensity that we're seeing?
Well, the business registry, I was one of the colleagues on that colleague's memo. The business registry is a first step in that. It's not the first step, but it's a first step in trying to account for how many employees per 1,000 square feet actually occupy buildings. So, so that's one way. And repeat the question.
So I was wondering, I mean, right now, doesn't the parking follow a certain formula?
Oh, yes.
Based on square footage as opposed to number of employees?
Parking actually is based on the number of employees per, like say for instance, there's 4 employees per 1,000 square feet is what retail and office is based on basically. And part of what has exacerbated the problem here from my perspective is that, in regards to parking and traffic both, is that development over time has been constrained by parking requirements, daylight playing, setbacks, compatibility, any number of things. And I think we've just been too soft on most of those. Plus the fact that we have an out of keeping count for how many employees per 1,000 square feet. And that goes back a ways. I mean, back when I mentioned SOFA 1 earlier, back then there were offices that were 8 per 1,000. and we just haven't wanted to address it as a city. And now we're seeing it really explode to even more than 8 per 1,000. There are other ways that people can get to work, of course, but but without some kind of overall mechanism to get people, to change their behaviors. We have to have the count, we have to have the data, and we have to implement programs to get people to change their behaviors.
Can you take us back to 2012 and your consideration of the two Arriaga matters? You are as far as we can tell, the only council member that raised any concerns about the closed meetings that were being held. Why was this not addressed within the council, the concerns that at least you had about those closed meetings? And did you ever receive a response from the staff to your request for an explanation as to why these meetings were taking place?
I was just looking at this recently, and I did receive a response. It was brief, and I'm going from memory here. I think you had a public records request, so you have it in your files.
I don't think we got the response. We got your inquiry.
Oh,
but
interesting.
go ahead.
As I'm recalling, and again, I'm going from memory, I think it was that the staff needed to update the council before the matter became a public meeting. It was something very, very brief. But I'm going from memory. I can't give you the exact words, but it was brief.
Well, so I guess my question is, how did, having become concerned about what was happening, how is it that then the council and you proceeded to do what you did?
So I felt like it was a rock and a hard place situation. For me, it's like I had concerns. You've seen them. You've seen part of them. Part of them were verbal as well. And I felt like I was between a rock and a hard place. No excuses here. It's just fact. If I went to another meeting regarding the projects, I felt like I was, not acting in a way that I think we should be acting. If I didn't go, I wasn't going to know what was going on. And so I felt like, which should I do? And so I ended up ultimately going, again, feeling in that kind of betwixt and between kind of situation. Neither situation was comfortable.
Well, did you think, since those meetings weren't official closed sessions of the city council, they were small group meetings.
Right.
Nothing would have prevented you or any other council member from raising a public concern about those meetings. Unlike a regular closed session where you're legally not allowed to discuss that. Did you ever give any consideration to raising this publicly and saying, hey, we shouldn't be meeting like this?
I raised questions in public when it finally did become public about what was even presented, because what was presented in the staff report was, I think my comments at the time were that as far as the public's concerned, this is still an ethereal project. There was very little information provided. The sketches I don't think were even provided. So I raised concerns in those regards, both publicly and privately in email. That was also maybe what you got as part of our public records request. At the time, and I can't say it was the better thing to do. At the time, I've seen what's happened to council members where you raise questions and you can be so marginalized that you're just ineffective on anything thereafter. And so it was a balancing act. It was not an easy situation. I can't say it was the right or wrong decision to make at the time. Just what was going on, I was very, very uncomfortable with, and I think it wasn't the right thing. The civil grand jury has reported on that. But it was a difficult position, and it was not easy to contend with.
The vote that you guys took for spending $250,000 for this design work relating to the 27 University area, is that a vote that you would have reconsidered, or do you feel like that was appropriate within just kind of a planning, from a planning perspective?
Two things. One is, haven't thought about that one for a while, but two things. One is, I think if it was from the the planning perspective of it, I think it was appropriate given Stanford had provided money to look at transit connections. I think that was appropriate. The part that had to do with design, if I'm recalling correctly, I had requested and asked that we get to see those contracts before they were let, and it didn't happen because they were broken into smaller contracts that are don't have to come to council.
I wanted to talk about process as well with Maybell and just kind of the general concept. You said at the Rotary Forum a couple days ago that one of your priorities is ensuring an inclusive process with the community. And it seems like that's partly the council or the city's job, and it's partly residents' job as well, because there were certainly structural opportunities for people to participate. And yet the council got to a certain point, and then it seemed like the uproar came to a fevered pitch. So what happened, and then what do you think could be done in the future to avoid that sort of clash in terms of where the residents are in awareness and where the council and the city is?
I think a few things. Excuse me. I think. Pardon me. I think a few things happened. It's. I said at the time when there was going to be the referendum on this project that I was really feeling that it was unfortunate that it was about this project or became focused on this project, because I thought it was a supportable, good project. There are any number of other projects where I would have supported a referendum. I don't know exactly where this one kind of got derailed in terms of communication, but I was hearing, certainly before the talk of referendum, that, you know, there was unhappiness in communications with the city staff, with the housing corp, and with other people about the neighbors. It just seemed like, and I don't know how it got to be an unproductive communication. I'm not sure how that happened. This project did become, the Maybell project did become kind of the, the tipping point for, I think, distrust and, people feeling that they weren't being heard, their concerns weren't being adequately addressed. So I think a lot of things kind of culminated in this particular project. I think what we do need to do going forward is have meaningful, and that word gets used, but I think we need to have meaningful dialogue with all stakeholders that are involved in something. And by that I mean not just lip service, I mean serious, considerable, meaningful dialogue with people so that people feel heard. People know when they're being heard, and that's understanding, where people are coming from, and it's empathizing with their position even if you don't agree. And that can happen, and it really can happen. And I think we don't do a good job of that as a city, and I'm not sure always that other entities do a good job of that, and I'm not sure always the community does a great job of that. But I think we can get there. But we have to be willing, and the city, I think, needs to lead on that.
There's a lot of concern about the future of the California Avenue Business District, and it's sort of going the way of downtown in terms of how its ground floor business environment is, and driving out small retail, neighborhood serving retail. What are your views on how to protect California Avenue from some of those negative impacts? Well, it has ground floor retail protections now, and I'm liaison to the California Avenue Business Association, and they are conducting, and have been for maybe about a month or so, a poll or a petition to try to get people to support protecting the local independent businesses. And Jessica Roth, for instance, is one of the people working on that, and she came to council, I believe, a week ago Monday, and they have almost 500 names on that petition at this point in time. I think it's quite appropriate for the city to put a protection on California Avenue, maybe a little bit more than that, but certainly California Avenue, that restricts chain stores to a percentage of the streetscape. Other communities do it. It's practical. Not only preserves the neighborhood character, but it also is a good economic thing to do, because people come to different communities because they want to go to X store or Y restaurant.
So I think it's appropriate, and I'm hoping it will be coming forward in a not too distant future because we need to get some protections out there.
So, as I understand what you just said, you're viewing the best approach as one of managing the percentages of chain store presence on the avenue, not limiting it to chains of under a certain number of stores.
Oh, well, you can do it in different ways. Yes, you can do
So
it.
you don't have a strong preference as to how to do it, but you want some sort of limitation on chain stores.
Yeah, chain stores can be defined in a number of ways. Often it's done by, if you have more than 12 outlets, for instance, you're a chain store. If you have more than 8 outlets, you're a chain store. So something of that nature would be applied, yes.
And you mentioned having seen this been successful in other communities. What are you thinking?
San Francisco has it, for instance, in some of the neighborhoods.
Any
is one
smaller
example.
communities?
There are, and I've actually have a list, I've seen a list, and the people collecting petitions have even gathered some of that information as well. I'm not coming up with it right off the top of my head.
If you can provide us with that, that'd be really helpful.
Sure.
And then what about the potential for further proliferation of restaurants?
That's where I was going, yes. I've thought for years we have too many restaurants on University Avenue in downtown. For a variety of reasons. I kind of, sort of think of downtown almost as a restaurant grotto. And, that's good if that's what the plan is and that's what you want it to be. But it doesn't matter if it's a restaurant or if it's, a hair and nail salon or if it's a hardware store, whatever it is. Those uses, you have to make sure it's like, is this really what we want? Because those uses displace other uses. And restaurants in particular stay for a long time. Where Jungle Copy was on Emerson Street, it's now going to be converted to a restaurant. So we're losing yet another service and retailer to a restaurant. I've thought for a very long time that we have too many downtown, and you can also provide quotas for that through zoning as well. Burlingame does that, for instance.
So this would be through a conditional use permit process?
It could either be a conditional use permit or it could be through a quota system, either way. Or it could be a combination.
Mm-hmm. And so why have you not proposed this in the past?
I have no reason to think that there's any kind of council support for that. So I would be in, yes.
I think this would be the right time to propose it if you were going to do it between now and November 2nd.
For California Avenue, yes. For University or downtown, maybe, but I feel rather doubtful about that.
So just, can you explain, you say there's not the political support for it on the council. So is that the test as to whether you would advocate for something, whether you've got at least 2 other colleagues that are willing to toe the line on a particular proposal?
Not always, no. Pick your battles, right? I mean, there are already so many restaurants downtown, I don't want to say I've given up on it.
Well, I don't mean downtown in particular, and I don't even mean that topic in particular, but just in general, when do you pick what battles do you pick?
I'll give you an example. So Pat Burt and I, if I can mention another council member, he and I were strong advocates for increasing our HISRAP funding for the social services organizations. And we actually caused it with objections to go to council twice to increase that funding. When times were flush before, we were at 1% of budget. And when the economy turned down, the social services organizations suffered. That's the most vulnerable population we have, and they suffered by a decrease in funding. So he and I especially were both lobbying very hard to get that funding increased. We got it increased not to 1% of budget. We got, I think it was 60-something, I forgot the exact number, but something like $60,000 increase plus, and this was Pat's idea, to give credit, not mine. I wish it had been my idea. It said so at the time, to create a rainy day fund for those HISRAP organizations. So that was a struggle, and that was definitely, we did not have majority support when we took that back. But yeah, there have been a number of things like that. So it's not always the litmus test, but pick your battles. Now, I'm not afraid to be in the minority.
Well, I want to turn our attention to the idea of Palo Alto pursuing perhaps frivolous or just projects that have something to do with having a world-class reputation. At the Rotary debate, there was some criticism of the iconic bridge, the 101 bridge to the Baylands, as being perhaps too costly. And I know that you suggested the design competition to begin with. Cool Cities Challenge is another idea that was out there. What's your take on the City Council's balance between pursuing things that may be innovative and leading edge versus just getting the job done?
I think sometimes we err on this side, and I've said this, I think we err on the side of doing things to promote Palo Alto's image as leading edge, cutting edge, innovative. We are all of that, should be proud that we are, but I think sometimes we should be paying attention to, our HISRAP organizations, to ground floor retail protections, looking at some zoning improvements instead of doing some of those things. I think we can do both, but we can't do both to the extent that we are, we're ambitious. We're ambitious here, but I think we sometimes pay too much attention to that image.
Is there any kind of line that you would draw where in some areas you would say that's perfectly fine, and some areas let's just stick to?
Well, the Cool Cities Challenge, I think that was the one, pardon me if I have the name of it wrong, there was one thing that came forward, a year or so ago, and I just thought it was not a good expenditure of staff time and effort or money, and I think that maybe in the Cool Cities Challenge, Janati can maybe remember.
You and Shar voted against Cool City Challenge.
Yeah.
Well, so why do we want to have an $8 million bridge over 101 that's iconic?
There are two questions. Do we want a bridge across to provide access to the Baylands for South Palo Altans?
I know the answer to that is yes. So
Yes.
that's not
Yes.
really the question.
Yes. Well, it's going to have some kind of design, right? It's going to be designed in some fashion or other, so why not, there's going to be money spent on a design, so why not have it be a design competition so that we get a better design and something that's more innovative?
How about just going down the street and finding a bridge that looks great, it's already been done, and replicate it? That bridge down in Mountain View looks pretty nice.
And yeah, could be. What really the thought was is that, because the construction is the most significant portion of this, what the thought was is, my thought was, I should say, is Mitchell Park, for instance, that was a design competition. I've always understood that it was anyway. And it really brought out some innovative, creative thought and design, and it's a much beloved, park. The creatures in it, the little statues and all of that, the frogs and the bears and all of that. I think it was a very successful project. I think sometimes what happens in Palo Alto is we have the same designers doing too much of the work, and we've had criticisms for the kind of design work that we're getting. So my hope with this that we would be expanding the pool of people who would be applying and expanding the concepts that we'd be receiving and reviewing. It seemed to be heading down one path, and I wanted to shake things up.
On the topic of vehicle dwelling, you were one of the ones who voted against the ban, and I was wondering if you could just walk us through that, because obviously the majority voted to institute that, although it's now in abeyance.
I appreciate the question. What had happened was, as you know, what had happened is that the staff had continued to let the internet stay on after the hours at Cubberley, after open hours at Cubberley. So it became kind of, I think Jim Keene even referred to it as a de facto homeless shelter, I think is what he may have called it. The showers were left open. These were against the recommendations of some of the other organizations around that operate, facilities for homeless even. It's not a very good situation. So it became an uncomfortable situation. I toured there twice, once on my own and once with police. And it became uncomfortable for residents. I understand why it did. I do understand that. At the same time, I thought some of those changes could be made, and we could be looking for solutions for where people could go or how they could be in a place in a more safe and less threatening manner for themselves and for members of the community. Instead, what we were doing with the recommendation that came from staff was we were saying, you can't be here and we don't know where you're going to go or what you're going to do. So it just seemed to me like we were just saying no to people to being in our community. Solutions were not adequate before, or possibilities and alternatives were not being provided before the quote-unquote solution of foreclosing Cumberly and other places for them to stay. So it seemed a backwards approach to me and kind of not very thoughtful or sensitive from my perspective. And it was not out of, my vote was not out of disrespect for the people who had concerns. I share those concerns, but this was not the approach to take.
So what is your feeling right now about what can be done about people living in their cars but causing friction with residents? Is that a police enforcement situation, or is there policy still to be made?
I think there is still policy to be investigated. Santa Barbara has a program where people register. We talked about this and didn't get that far with it in that period of time. Santa Barbara has a program where people can register themselves and their vehicles and park in various locations. It makes the people inside the vehicles known to people, makes them known to police and neighbors and community members. And Santa Barbara's program is very successful, and I can't say problem-free, but I'm not aware of any problems.
Now, in Buena Vista, there's a huge risk of displacement of hundreds of people. Mm-hmm. And understanding that you can't talk about the quasi-judicial issue of the appropriateness of the financial statement. Is there a role that the city could play in working with the property owner should that sale, the ability to sell that property, come through? Is there a role that the city could be playing to manage that property, or?
Let's pretend, okay? Let's pretend that we go through the trailer park closure process, and that's all found to be adequate. Let's just pretend, okay? So if the property then comes on the market, I think the city could have a role. The city has made available and known to people who might be interested in, talking with the owner now, that there are housing in lieu funds that are available, either to the current owner or some other entity that could negotiate with him. The city could have at least that role, and I would hope could work with the owner to reach some kind of more positive outcome.
Would you be in favor of, convening some sort of group, any kind of community dialogue around that? Or what do you think, what role would you particularly look to play in that?
Again, pretending that we've gone through that process, and the owner is saying, what now? I'd be more than happy to convene something to see what outcomes we might achieve.
What would be your vision for that acreage on that property, assuming there was no mobile home park there?
Assuming no mobile home park, I really haven't even thought that far. I truly haven't, because we aren't even there yet. So I truly have not thought about it.
I want to give you a chance to respond to concerns that some have raised about the conflict that you might have had, and that was brought out publicly in dealing with on the Regional Housing Mandate Committee. Mm-hmm. The Fair Campaign Practices Commission made a determination that there was no conflict. But could you address how that issue surfaced and just what your relationship has been with Mr. Pierce and what your thinking was in how to navigate through that discussion given your past involvement?
Mm-hmm. Which one to take first here? So my relationship with Steve Pierce is, I've known him for a very, very long time. I think I probably met him first through the SOFA 1 plan. Known his wife even longer through preservation issues. So he has a degree in city planning, and so I learned that through the SOFA 1 plan too. So, it's fun talking with other people who have those interests and such. I really enjoyed the Planning Commission. So he had this concept for putting workforce housing on the Arrestadero property that he and I guess there were 3 other parcels there. And to me that was interesting because it's something I'm interested in terms of, because people in Palo Alto, if they're going to commute, they use a bicycle or they walk much more often than they take the train or bus to work. So it seemed to make sense to me that you'd put workforce housing committed to, by deed restriction, to these nearby employers. That's what I wanted the city staff to go explore. So that was of interest to me. I have the same interest in doing that at the Fry site. It seems to make sense to me. How it surfaced, I had asked the city attorney who services that committee if I had a conflict of interest, describing my relationship with Steve Pierce, and was told no, I didn't have one. It is true that the city attorney's office isn't the final say in that, but I can't imagine I know of no, and I can't imagine any situation where a council member said yes or no and gone to the FPPC to get a different ruling. So I acted based on that information, that recommendation. How it came forward, exactly, I couldn't say.
So, can you just quickly describe what your financial relationship had been with Mr. Pierce and confirm when your last, commission, I guess, was?
It had been at least 1.5 years. I believe it was, it was certainly 2012. I think it was November 2012 since I'd had any kind of income from that source. And my relationship with him was, sorry about that, my relationship with him is based on preservation and conservation. Again, it's like, I have interest in both. I love planning and such, so that was my interest and involvement with him.
And the income was referral commissions?
It was based on my quote-unquote expertise having to do with preservation and conservation. And yes, I would put people together, but it was because of and due to my interest in the application of preservation and conservation in those roles.
But the fees you received, where were they? Were they coming from Steve Pierce or from a client? Or can you just explain more fully what?
From Steve. I had done have done a couple of other projects where I was getting income from, on minor projects from owners themselves. But yes, we had a relationship where the money would come through him.
And these were fees, like consulting fees, or commissions for this
consulting fees.
Sale of property.
Consulting.
I think it's been described as commissions.
It was consulting fees, and I think that's what all the communications were, consulting fees.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I think that pretty much is our time. So.